The Marine Mammal Protection Act, signed in 1972, brought back whale populations from the verge of extinction. I met with Nora Nickum from the Seattle Aquarium, who works in conservation policy, creating new laws that protect whales from further threats. Nickum leads ocean conservation policy work for the Seattle Aquarium. She's also a children's author who explores nature and STEM topics in her books. Her middle-grade nonfiction book, Superpod, Saving the Endangered Orcas of the Pacific Northwest, introduces readers to the southern resident orcas and the people working to save them, using everything from medicine and laws to drones and dogs. So Nora, you're committed to conservation, but I think people probably have different views of what conservation policy is all about. How would you describe it to people?
So when we talk about conservation policy work that the Seattle Aquarium does, we're talking about raising our voices, speaking up for laws and regulations that can help protect the health of the ocean, the health of human communities, people who rely on the ocean for their livelihoods, for recreation, and helping to make sure we pass policies that will protect those resources and those experiences for a very long time.
Two distinct orca populations live in Seattle's Salish Sea, the endangered southern resident and the thriving Biggs orcas. While Biggs orcas feed off a healthy seal population, southern residents are struggling due to the decline in their food source of salmon. It's interesting, though, reading your book, I think a lot of people don't think about all the different nuances and how this one little feature could have such an impact on orcas, or this, just all the different elements involved. And I think from a holistic standpoint, we don't really look at it that way. So can you talk us through kind of some of the things that are important that we don't really even think about?
Yeah, so there are three main threats that are affecting the endangered southern resident orcas and making it hard for them to grow their population and recover. The first one is food. So they rely on salmon. Orcas are specialists. The southern resident orcas eat salmon, and there aren't as many salmon as there used to be because rivers have been dammed, waters are warming, there's more pollution. So that's one of the things where we need to make sure that salmon have healthy habitat and there's plenty of salmon for orcas to eat. Another one of the threats is underwater noise and disturbance from things like boats. So orcas rely on sound to communicate with each other underwater and to find their food. They echolocate, kind of like bats. So that's how they find their food, really, where it's very dark underwater. But when there's a lot of noise around, it interrupts that ability to find their food and communicate. And then the third one is pollution. So toxic chemicals in the water build up in the smallest fish and then the bigger fish and then in the orcas, and that really affects their health.
And the noise of boats, there's been changes, and you've been there at the forefront fighting these battles. So talk about that.
Yeah, so reducing underwater noise is one of the things we can do that will have a very quick impact to help the endangered orcas. It takes a long time to make sure there are more fish or to clean up the water, but we can make the waters quieter tomorrow. And one of the ways we've been doing that is by changing the laws so that small vessels need to stay farther away from the orcas and they need to go more slowly. So when boats go slower, or when they turn off their engines, or when they're farther away, the noise reduces underwater. We're also worried about boats being too close because of things like hitting a whale, but also just the presence of boats nearby distracts the orcas from caring for their young and hunting for food. And so giving them more space can make a real difference. And so what we've done most recently is help to pass a law that requires smaller vessels to stay 1,000 yards away from the endangered orcas specifically, starting in 2025. And we're hopeful that that'll make it a lot easier for them to do all the things they need to do to catch food and feed their young.
Talk to me about your love affair with these amazing creatures.
So I grew up in this region as a kid, spending a lot of time on shore, looking for whales and watching them from shore, and just trying to stay tuned with my ear to the sound of their breath, and just finding a lot of magical experiences with friends and family watching the whales. And as their population started to decline over the years, it was great to be able to find a position like this at the Seattle Aquarium where I could advocate for all the things we need to do to help them recover.
Well, talk to me more about that. What role does the aquarium play, and how do you guys brainstorm and say, like, this is what we're going to focus on? Because actually, I think, from that standpoint, you really kind of have to focus on specific issues. You can't get everything through at once. So what's the plan of attack, and how do you come about doing that?
Yeah, well, we work with a lot of partners, other organizations, state agencies, federal agencies, to try and figure out what needs to be done and what the opportunities are right now. We work to pass laws in the Washington state legislature, so we'll go down as the Seattle Aquarium and testify in support of bills and talk to legislators about why this matters. We will talk to our members of Congress about federal bills that can help the orcas, and to agencies like the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, which does federal vessel regulations about ways to protect them, and trying to address all three of the threats that I mentioned: the lack of food, the pollution, and the underwater noise, and do things that'll help in the short term, but also bigger things that can make a difference in the longer term.
It's estimated that there are just 74 southern resident orcas left in their habitat in the Salish Sea, and that's down from 98 in 1995.
As you look at the landscape right now, what's the biggest threat in your estimation?
So really, the lack of food is the number one thing. So we need to restore salmon habitat. So salmon have plenty of cool, clean rivers to swim up to spawn. That'll require removing some dams. So there's a lot of organizations, including the Seattle Aquarium, calling for breaching the lower Snake River dams, which are ones that are blocking fish passage to some degree and would help restore salmon if they were breached. And if we can replace the services they provide to human communities, like irrigation and energy. The other big thing is climate change. We really need to reduce emissions, because one of the other threats to salmon and orcas is all the warming water temperatures is really bad for salmon health and reduces their numbers and affects orcas as well. So things like transitioning more quickly to renewable energy, making public transit much more accessible will help.
Those are big ticket items. Are there kind of sleepless nights for you? I mean, or is it just you got to wake up each day and look for the small victories? I mean, how does Nora attack each day given the complexity of what you're facing?
Well, for one thing, I know that I'm not alone, and the Seattle Aquarium is not alone. We work with a lot of partners, and there are a lot of people coming together to make change and push for changes, and those things are really making a difference. So we see bills passing every year. We see things like in the middle fork of the Nooksack River, there was a dam removed just a couple of years ago due to hard work by the Lummi Nation, the Nooksack Indian tribe, City of Bellingham, and others. And now Chinook salmon can swim upstream to spawn again in the upper cool reaches of that river. So there are really tangible things that have been done, and bills that we've been able to pass here in Olympia. So you can't do it all at once, but you can see progress every year.
With 2 books published and 2 on the way, as well as numerous articles in kids' publications, Nora is passionate about getting the conservation, nature, and science message to people at an early age.
As I stand here talking to you, I want to maybe use an aquarium analogy, but you kind of strike me as an octopus with tentacles going in a lot of different directions. And one of those tentacles is writing books for kids. And it's almost like bringing in reinforcements, isn't it? I mean, once you get kids hooked and you even have a call for action in your book, it's like every voice matters and you can do this and that. Talk to me about that approach and the importance of getting kids hooked, because you were hooked as a kid.
I was hooked as a kid, and I still love learning new things and then trying to communicate all those fascinating things in creative ways. And doing school visits with kids, they're so excited to learn about the orcas and to learn about individual orcas, because the orcas all have names and we can know who's related to who. And I want kids to know that they can make a difference today. There are things they can do with their families, like making sure not to wash their cars in the driveway, wash them at a car wash so all that dirty water and the chemicals get cleaned before they go out into the environment. Or calling a legislator, even if a kid is not old enough to vote yet, legislators will listen to them and want to know what they have to say. In the book, I also wanted to make it clear that there are a lot of ways in future careers to help endangered species and help the environment. So scientists do really cool work, They're using drones, they're using dogs to learn more about the orcas and how we can help them. But there are also people who are policy advocates like me. They're educators, they're artists. And so there are just a lot of ways kids can think about using their talents and their passions today and as they get older.
But when I look at what's on your plate, I don't see extra time to write a kid's book. So what inspired you to do it, and how did you carve out the time to do it?
I'm a very early riser. I like to get up early, and kids' books are shorter than adult books, so that helps. So I do picture books too. And I have a young daughter, and so reading books to her has inspired me. But also I think there's more room to be kind of playful in the writing and think about fun analogies that kids will relate to. So for example, we talked about underwater noise, and orcas need to speak up and use more energy when there's a lot of noise around them. And it's kind of like being in a loud cafeteria and having to shout at your friend down the table. And that takes more energy. If you had to do it all the time, you'd get a hoarse throat and you wouldn't want that. So just trying to think about how to make things relatable to kids is really fun.
So Nora, let me ask about your most recent book, which is a picture book. It's about holes, is that right?
Yes, and it's called This Book is Full of Holes, and it's got everything from whale blowholes to potholes, things that kids might see in their daily lives, ones that they can make, ones that are in outer space. It was a really fun, quirky one to write.
Let's talk about whales again and some of the fun things that you have in your book. I mean, you talked about dogs, but when I was reading that, I was like, this is wild. Talk to us about that.
Yeah, I got to go out on a boat with Dr. Deborah Giles from Wild Orca and her dog Eba, who sniffs out the scent of whale scat or whale poop from a mile away. And they collect it and they can send it to a lab and learn all kinds of things. They can learn if the whale was pregnant, if it was stressed out, what it ate, whether it was sick. And so all that information is really fun and important.
And what about the sound? I mean, what do we know about that? And what are the mysteries surrounding that still?
So there are 3 pods in the southern resident orca population, J, K, and L, and there are a bunch of different calls that they share. Some of them are more likely to make one call than another, but they use these calls regularly. Scientists can detect the differences between them when they listen to the underwater hydrophones, but they don't know what all the calls mean. So scientists are still listening to the recordings of hydrophones and trying to figure out what might these different calls mean and when they're calling out to each other.
But we do know they're really intelligent, aren't they?
We do know they're really intelligent.
The aquarium has hosted over 28 million visitors since opening its doors and provided marine conservation education to over 2 million school children.
Reading your book, I could see it where, the kids set it down and the parents read it too. I mean, it's very accessible. So that gets to the larger question. All of us have a role to play in this. What would be your call to action for everybody when it comes to conservation? Because everybody, as you say in the book, everybody's voice matters.
Right. I think voting is a key thing. So thinking about what are the candidates going to do for the environment, for orcas, salmon, the ocean, that's just something to consider in making your decision. Contacting elected officials and letting them know that you care about the environment, you care about all these endangered species, and you want them to dedicate more funding to helping protect those resources and animals. Making just daily decisions, like if you're buying seafood, you can look for seafood according to the Seafood Watch Guide that helps you know if it was sustainably harvested and will help make sure there's fish for people and all kinds of other animals in the future. And then just coming to places like the Seattle Aquarium and other aquariums and learning more about the animals, asking questions about, how do they live? What are the threats that are facing them? What can I do? I think it's a fun experience, and you can learn more action ideas along the way.
And you say you didn't hesitate in the early days to protest the capture of the magnificent, intelligent social beings. And you kind of make it clear that, you're a policy advocate, but kids can do much more, as you said, reach out to legislators, write emails, that sort of thing. So in the grand scheme of things, as you mobilize all of these kids, give me your vision, a couple years out, 5 years out, what would you like to see?
I just think we can pass a lot more laws in the near term that would really help, but also allocate more funding. So right now there are a lot of projects that are ready to go to restore salmon habitat. where people, communities, local governments, tribes have come together and agreed on what needs to be done, and they just need the funding to do it. So that just is the final piece of the puzzle to make a really big difference. And I think kids can be a really big voice in that. So we've taken our high school youth ocean advocates to Olympia to talk to state legislators. And we see the legislators really perk up and listen in a new way. You know, they like hearing from people who aren't full-time lobbyists, and the kids are the future voters, the future decision makers, and, you know, a fresh voice talking about why they care. They're not there because they're paid to be there. They're there because they really care. And so I think they're heard in a really unique way.
Whales are magnificent. We have a love affair of whales. We understand quite a bit about whales, but there's still so much mystery surrounding whales. How would you kind of distill that to our viewers in terms of, you know, the magnificent, what we know, what we don't know, what you're still curious about?
So the southern resident orcas that we've been talking about are the most studied whale on the planet. We know so much about them, and we know when a lot of them were born, who they're related to. We know that they make best friends. We know that they stay with their mothers for their entire lives. We know exactly what they eat. We know where the salmon they ate came from. So there's so much we know, but we don't know where they are all the time. And I think that's really cool, that they are these huge animals, but they can still disappear from time to time. And it helps us learn more and protect them when we know where they are, but I like that they can be free to explore and not be within human sight all the time. I hope that we can learn whatever we need to know to better protect them, but I think we already know a lot that will help us figure out what we need to do. We just need to make sure that we all do what we can, and then we get our elected officials to take the steps that need to happen at that policy level.
Nora, I have one final question for you, which is, as I look out at this landscape, I don't know how I would work each day. I'd just be gazing out the window, and how tough is it to come to work each day? Or is that the motivation? You look at this and you say, I've got to protect this. This is really important. This is a big part of my life.
That is the motivation. You know, I'll see a great blue heron walking to the aquarium on the sidewalk right in the middle of the city of Seattle. There's lots of wildlife. And if a day gets stressful, you can come across the street to the Seattle Aquarium and say hi to the sea otters or the octopus. So it's a good place to feel some balance and feel inspiration.